I tracked down and found a long-lost 1971 Hemi Challenger RT. This is the story. Let's go. So like you, if you're watching this, you're probably a car enthusiast as I am. And you know, growing up, there was always this car that I knew about. You know, my father told me about his friend who bought a brand new 71 Hemi Challenger RT and they never knew what happened to it. And it always sat in my mind as like, I wonder if I can find it. Like, whatever happened to this? The fellow that bought it knew was named Ron, and he was a farmer in rural Canada, and he went and ordered this vehicle from the dealership with low options. He wanted a Hemi, a shaker hood, and as minimal number of options as possible because he was going to go drag racing with it. So he went and ordered it, bought it. 1971 it arrived. He brought it home, drove it 60 miles, tore it apart, turned it into a drag car, took it across Western Canada, racing at lots of different tracks. And a year later, he traded it into the dealership for a brand new Charger 500. Since that time, no one knew what happened to it. And I decided, well, I'm going to do a hero effort here and see if I can find it. In fact, I did find it. And this video is a story of how I tracked it down. But before I get into how I actually tracked it down, I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of the vehicle. So it's a pretty neat story. So Ron trades the vehicle in 1972 at the dealership for the new Charger 500. A fellow named Harold gets it next. He drives it for a year, street races it to death, puts a custom paint job on it, blows the transmission up, has it rebuilt, trades it in on a brand new Chevy Caprice. The next owner then picks it up, named Rick, and Rick also loves to street race, does a lot of it. In fact, he told me a story of getting stopped by the highway police who put up a roadblock to try and catch him in southern Saskatchewan. So quite the adventures he had. He put a lot of road miles on it and sold it privately in 1974 to a fellow also named Ron. And Ron lived in a different area of the province, about 2 hours away. So Ron was really meticulous and picky. So he, took it to a super stock drag racer extraordinaire who like rebuilt the motor and made it really more racy. And he had it for a few years, but was transferred to southern Alberta to an area called Medicine Hat. And he had it there for a while. In about 1977, it wasn't practical for his family. So he traded it for a 77 truck and some cash to a fellow named Graham. And Graham was a racer at heart. In fact, he turned that thing into a pure race car. He painted it blue, changed the top. It's got a black vinyl top, built a special motor for it, Dana 60 rear end, 538 gears, big slicks, and he would race that thing hard throughout Alberta. But at some point in the early 90s, it became apparent that he really wanted to build a purpose-built race car, and a street-legal race car wasn't part of the option, so he put it up for sale. And the car was nearly sold to the Lee brothers in Red Deer, which are a very famous family of racers and Hemi engine builders, but it actually ended up being sold to a fellow named Murray. So in the early 90s, Murray bought it for $10,000. And at the time, the prices of Hemi e-bodies was skyrocketing, so Murray actually, rather than drive it much, he actually had it restored by his friend Mike. And rather than that take a year or two, it took almost a decade. And so the vehicle was taken back and restored to original standards. In talking to Mike, he said all the sheet metal was original. Need a little bit of rust repair, some damage, having big slicks on the back. The frame rails were notched, but as far as he knows, it was all original drivetrain, powertrain that was in there. So pretty cool at this point. In about that time though, the market was getting pretty hot for the price on these vehicles. And for whatever reason, Murray needed to sell. And sadly, Murray passed in 2005, so I'm unable to get any information from him or his family. But Mike had quite a bit of detail. So Mike was connected to a well-known car collector in Western Canada named Fred Phillips. Has one of the most amazing private car collections, arguably, in Canada. Anyways, when the time came for Murray to sell it, Mike said, I know just the guy. He called Fred. Fred came, looked at it. Fred called his friend, Steve Giuliano. If you're a Mopar fan, you know that name. And Steve actually told him to look at the fender tag and what sort of information to look for. And instantly Steve said, you need to buy it. Original engine, shaker hood N96 Mopar, Hemi, you've got to buy it. And so Fred did. 1999, Fred bought it, brought it home, maybe drove it a bit, but was stored in his very iconic collection where it sits up on a rack. And thank you to Fred. He allowed me to come and take some photos and look at it. In fact, I even have a copy of the fender tag, which I'll put at the end of the video with a full breakdown. Fred opens his collection sometimes in the Calgary area. If you're willing to make a donation, he opens it up for private groups that make a donation to addictions work in the province. So big shout out to Fred for the work that he does with that. That's the history of the vehicle. How did I track it down? So you must be wondering, how did I actually track down this lost vehicle? Well, there's some big themes here. Number one was extensive research, extensive word of mouth. I literally asked hundreds of people over years, and every once in a while I'd get another thread of information that would lead me in the right direction. A little bit of luck and a lot of hard work. That's how I did that all up. In fact, I'm going to do a separate video at some point with the process I used, because I think you could replicate it with lots of other vehicles. But I'll give you the key points. The number one is that you needed to be able to get the VIN. So you have to find a way to locate the VIN. And that actually was not that hard, because I was in Canada. The publicly available list of all Hemi cars that was sold in Canada is a fairly well-known thing. So from there, it was very easy to look at the 5 Hemi Challengers that were sold in Canada and to look down and figure out the one that was sold in this province, and the VIN number is well known. Once you have the VIN, you have some options. You can work through the legal means, which would be doing VIN searches across Canada. You know, there's lots of different services for that. If you happen to have someone that works in insurance or in law enforcement, they may have other ways to at least give you a direction of where it may be. In my case, the VIN was the first clue, because I was able to find a computerized record from 1997 in Alberta that identified the VIN as being registered there, which told me that's for sure one of the last places that it ended up. But in the meantime, I'd talked to hundreds of people over years. No one had ever seen this vehicle or knew about it. So it was really a needle in the haystack, but you need to get the VIN. That was the key thing. The number 2 thing I used was internet, but not to actually connect with people, but I used newspaper searches, and I also used it to look at historical phone books. Because if you find, in this case, for example, an ad, and here's an example of an ad, you can get the phone number. If you can get the historical directory listings, you can actually reverse that number. You can look through the different listings that are usually in archives at libraries, and you can figure out the name of the person who actually had the vehicle or owned the phone number line at the time when the advertisement was there. And that's a huge part of how you locate. Once you have a name, then you can use Facebook and all those things. But a lot of people that are older aren't necessarily active on Facebook, but at least you might have a name, and you can ask at Mopar clubs, you can ask with different groups, different car shows, and eventually you're able to find a few details that help out. But in my case, talking to every single person I knew and not being afraid to share the information I had all led to information. In this case, I actually wrote a letter to the residence where Murray lived in 2005 with a letter describing the information that I'd shared and what vehicle I was looking for. And believe it or not, that letter found its way to Mike, the person who had restored it, because whoever now owns the house or rented it actually knew who Mike was and who Murray was and had enough sense to send the letter, and then Mike reached out to me. So a little bit of luck goes a long way, but do your homework, get the VIN, tell everyone you know, turn every stone unturned that you can locate, and that's how I did it. So I'm going to share with you a breakdown of the fender tag so you actually know what this vehicle came with and how it was ordered. And so here you go. Like I said, one of 5 Hemi Challengers, 1971, sold in Canada. Pretty unique. Of those 5, Fred's Challenger here is only one of 3 with an automatic. It is one of 3, I believe, with a N96 with a shaker hood. And only one of 2 with an automatic, sorry, not 3. And I believe it's the only one that's in GY3, which is a Citroen yellow paint code, which is quite rare. Many people that remember the vehicle assumed it was FY1, which is more of a banana color. In fact, the photos I have out of, if you look at it, looks like FY1, but the green tinge of that yellow just doesn't show up well in photos over time. So yeah, definitely was that. So if you ever wonder what happened to a vehicle, by all means, you can definitely track it down. So from here, you can look through the build. There's put some details on there. Hemi, automatic, citronella, high back, white vinyl, full door panels, built November 12th, 1970. Canadian export A36, which is an 8 3/4 with 355s, bucket seats. And look at all these options. 3-speed wipers, drip moldings, dual exhaust, tachometer, N96, and stripes. That's it. Ron had one thing in mind, and that was to race. And that car certainly did a lot of racing in its life. And at the time of restoration, Mike restored it. It only had 53,000 miles on it. And it has about that on it right now as it sits in Fred's collection. So there you go. Ever wonder what happened to that long lost vehicle that you knew about years ago? Well, you too can find it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, give me a thumbs up and stay tuned. I plan to do a few more videos where I'll share you more about the process of how you find and how you hunt down vehicles. Thanks for watching.